You'll just hit start broadcast. So this is the U.
That's the U.
You're good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good.
So I don't need to do anything?
You'll just hit start broadcast when you're ready.
It just started.
Oh, you'll just hit stop broadcast when you're ready. Don't hit stop because you'll have to make a whole
So just let it go.
nothing wrong with it. It's good. You'll just hit start broadcast when you're ready. Just hit stop broadcast. Don't hit stop because you'll have to make a whole just let it go. Yeah, you want to turn it down.
Don't do it.
I'm doing it.
Whoa!
Got it.
And I was
Oh,
like,
Don't put rumors out on there.
I saw
Wow.
That's live, sir. Live.
you know, most of the time,
For your agreement.
me and my watch this
No, I'm up
movie,
here.
and
Here's the deal.
Deal.
And this guy said that all atheists are fools and that Calvinism is insane.
Jesus can't save them.
That's
Calvinism
what I
can.
said. I was like, what about the one?
You're gonna probably want to start singing.
All right, I was gonna try and figure it out.
Hey.
Obesity.
When do you want me to start, Cody?
There's nothing.
Wait for everyone to sit down?
Tom, sit down.
Alan's handing out. Welcome for those that are on live stream. I can't see you, but you can see me, hopefully. If not, we got our moderator that's going to be taking questions if you have questions. Everybody else, welcome. So my name is Dan Schemerhorn, and I'm going to be talking about how to communicate as more of a professional level. One of the things that I tell people all the time is that if you have a kid, not everybody has a kid in this room, but if you have a kid, they didn't bring your child to you and say, congratulations, you just had a baby communicator, right? So communication is a skill that we can all learn, okay? So we're going to talk about communicating and give you some skill sets, some techniques, if you will, that if you apply those techniques, you'll be able to become a better communicator. So everybody should have a workbook. And I believe if you're online, you should have a copy of the PowerPoint slide presentation. So before we get started, I want to explain a couple things on how I try to train people. There's 3 ways we learn as human beings. Can anybody tell me one way we learn? Visually, right? Visually, which is why you have a workbook and which is why we have a PowerPoint slide. So you can visually see the techniques that we're going to be talking about today. What's another way?
Audibly.
Audibly, right? Hopefully you can hear my voice. And you can hear me, and I'm not stuck behind this thing, so you can't see me, so I will try to move about here a little bit. So we also learn by hearing. And what's the third component? Doing or hands-on. Hands-on means that you will be taking notes. You will be writing things down, so you'll have that, which is why you have a workbook, all right? So I won't be able to do this with the online people, but I am going to do a little fun exercise that I'm going to start here in a second. And I only have one rule. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the back of the room and I'm going to give a phrase to that person whispered in their ear. Just like we did when we were in grade school, we're going to pass that message along until it comes up to the front of the room and we're going to hear how it turns out. Now, one of the things I want to say is that you cannot, and whether you're the person communicating or receiving the message, you cannot ask for feedback or another question, right? So you get to hear it once and once only. Do your best, all right? And we'll see what happens. So let's see. We're going to go back. Go back to Carla.
Yeah. Spray smeared kid right, okay?
Ready?
Mackenzie's probably gonna screw this up. Let's screw it up on purpose.
I have good clothes.
Oh boy.
We're really trying to play
You should be quiet to hear.
Don't try to listen in, Pastor Dan. Just do your best. There's no right or wrong answer, and you can't go back. These cheaters. Carla. Just pass. Pass what you heard. Come on, we don't want this to take the full time. So for those that are online, you should have hopefully printed out your workbook, and you should have printed out the PDF file that has all of the PowerPoint presentation slides in there, so it'll be easier for you to see and take notes. Just do your best. Do your best. There's no right or wrong answers.
Someone messed that up.
I know, I heard it too. That's what I heard. You blaming on me? Right.
Are we so fast?
Yeah, they're going really slow.
I honestly didn't do anything. I just said no.
I have a feeling.
Dan, how complicated did you make it?
Not very. It's very simple.
That makes no sense.
Oh, no. Here we go. Pat?
I don't know.
Blame you.
It wasn't me.
People are laughing more and more, and it's really not that comical. I just getting nervous here. Ken's going to be our final.
You gotta give it to him now. I don't know what it's gonna be by the time you get over there.
Somebody mumbled or spoke in tongues.
All right, everybody listen up. Ken's going to say what he heard, and then I'm going to repeat what I actually said the first time, okay? Ken, what did you hear?
The big black bear went into the shed and shined his shoes.
What?
The big black bear went into the
Shed and
shined his shoes. Okay. Interesting.
I said
Interesting. So here's what the message was to Carla. It was the big black bear jumped over the little brown fence into the green meadow.
Wow.
So the
It messed up all the way back here.
So here's the purpose of this little exercise. Although it's fun, I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, and what do I find out is that it's never the same. And the reason it's not the same is because there's a communication skill set or breakdown. So when we're talking about communication, we have to talk about what? Some kind of methodology, if you will. If you look at page 1, and you don't have to do this necessarily right now because of time, but if you look at page 1, it talks about some pre-work. And I really want you to think about a time where you said something to somebody and they responded much differently than what you thought they were going to respond, right? Why did that happen? Just like the exercise we just did, there's a breakdown in communication. So when the communication breaks down, the message gets completely changed, doesn't it? So I want you at some point later today to do this. Normally I have people fill it out right here because I know you're not going to go back and do it. But I encourage you to do that because learning these techniques is a learned methodology. And if you don't sit down and do the exercises or practice, you're not gonna retain anything. Okay? So go ahead and turn to page 2, and I want you very quickly to read through assessing your listening skills on page 2. And I want you to read those 10 questions and fill them out as seldom, sometimes, and frequently. Do it real quick. And if you're online, again, do it real quick if you've printed it out, which you should have. Read it, first response, just exit out. Don't dwell on it, just do it. We're not going to share them, so this is for you to look at later on. Because as you start to practice your skill sets and practice some of these techniques, 3 months from now, you're going to take a look at this listening skill set, and you're going to see that you've improved, okay? Because listening is one of the most important aspects of communication. If we look at a communication module, model, we look at a sender and a receiver. Didn't we have somebody that was receiving the message, right, that I gave? Carla was my receiver. And then she became the what? The sender to send the message to the next person. Well, in a perfect world, right, in a perfect world, which we don't live in, we all know that, is that there is something called static. There's 2 types of static that you got to be concerned with. The first type of static is internal static. That's where you're sitting there getting nervous. Why are you getting nervous? Because you don't want to be the one that messed it up. You don't want to be the one that messed up the phrase. And it doesn't matter who messed it up, but that internal pressure on yourself that you put on yourself is considered static internally. The second type of static is within the environment. If the heat kicked on and we could hear some fans coming through the ventilation, that might distract us a little bit. So those are the types of things that are going to distract you from hearing the message. All right. So static is a very negative thing when it comes to communication. All right. So if you look at the levels of communication that we're going to kind of talk about, and then we're going to end probably with this slide, I'm hoping, is there are basically levels of communication. The first one, I like to call it social conversation. If you've ever walked into an elevator and somebody walks in after you, what do you say? Hello, hi, how are you? Right? So you stand there awkward, right? And it's that silent moment where there's no communication. And silence makes people nervous too. So sometimes, hey, how are you? And how's the weather out there? So you have this level of social conversation where you just start asking about the weather and things of that nature. Now, as you start communicating more with an individual, then you're going to start getting into what I call small talk, right? Do you have any kids? Are you married? Oh, how old are your kids? Oh, you don't have any kids. You start to develop what's called small talk or conversation. As you continue along into that, you get into what's called idea sharing. And we're going to get a little bit more into idea sharing later on. But idea sharing is where you're having two-way communication, right? I got this idea. They say, well, that's not a great idea, or we could add this to that idea. And you start to build a relationship. Because if you start building a relationship with an individual, you won't necessarily share ideas with that stranger that walks in the elevator and share your life with them, but you will start sharing and communicating with somebody that you've had a little bit of risk-taking, right? Because risk-taking is going to be the next step that you're going to take. Because if you have a little bit of a relationship with somebody, you're going to take risk, aren't you? Right? You're not going to trust somebody with your wallet that you just met in an elevator. But if you know that person and you can work with that person, then you're going to start to have a relationship and start to trust that individual. So trust is kind of at the high peak of where you want your relationship to go. And it doesn't work backwards very well unless you've developed this, right? You usually don't trust somebody until what? Until you've taken risk with them, until you've had a relationship with them. If you have no relationship, you probably are not going to trust them with your wallet. But if you have a relationship with them, then you're going to start to trust them with that wallet or little things to continue to build that relationship. So, and then we'll talk about the peak later on at the end of this training here. So our communication today is going to focus on some listening core skills, because listening is probably the most important thing that you can do. Believe it or not, if you ever wanted to try an interesting experiment, the next time you go to a social event, try to listen twice as much as you speak. And at the end of the night, people will probably have a conversation and say, wow, what a great listener that guy was. No, they don't say that, do they? They say what? What a great communicator. Even though you're not communicating, you're listening, you're showing that you're listening to that individual and people want to be heard. So when they're being heard, they think you're a what? A great communicator. So, you know, there is theory behind why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? If we listen twice as much as we speak, then we're going to be able to be looked at as a professional communicator. So a lot of times it's just that and just listening. So listening is the cornerstone. And if you look on page 3 on your book, it says listening is the cornerstone of communication. There are 3 obstacles to listening. And if you look at this slide, obstacle one is differences between speaking and listening rates. All right, I speak pretty quickly, typically. So Pastor Mike speaks pretty quickly, typically. So if you're a person that listens a little bit slower, then what happens when somebody speaks a little bit faster? What happens?
They don't understand everything yet.
Yeah, they don't understand everything. They lose part of that message. They mess up the message. So if they're not listening to what you're speaking, to become a professional communicator, you actually only need one person to be the professional. Here's what I mean. Typically, people say both the receiver and the sender has to be a professional communicator. That's not true. It can actually be one way. As long as the person understands these techniques, and we're going to share some of these techniques, is you can find that if I'm a professional communicator, I like to think I am, I'm going to listen to what people are saying back to me. So I can always clarify if they're hearing me, right? So you're going to see that there are some techniques for that. So differences in speaking, loss of objectivity, right? Because if somebody's speaking too fast, or you're thinking about what you want to say next, how many times do we do that, right? We think about, what do I want to say? So we're not really listening actively like we should. So those are some of the things that can stop us from listening and receiving that message as accurately as we could. Remember, that can be internal or external. Being busy planning the response, as I just said. If we're planning our response, which is what most people do, right? You're waiting for them to take a breather so that you can put your message out there. So if you're doing that, you'll find that you're going to lose some of that message that they're sending to you. So you want to make sure that you're listening. Now, if you look at the bottom of page 3, it talks about poor listeners, some of the things that they do. Again, you can read through some of these. Glance at a watch, tap your finger, drum your fingers. Have you ever had anybody do that to you and you're thinking you want to just go, are you listening to me? Because they're thinking about something else. Make eye contact, nod occasionally, and say words of encouragement. These are the things that professional listeners are going to do. Make eye contact. Have you ever talked with anybody where they just didn't look at you? How does that make you feel? It's like drives you crazy, doesn't it?
You just think they're weird.
You might think they're weird, right? Because if they don't, if they're not paying attention to your eye contact, then they're probably not listening as well as they could. Finish people's sentences. We've all had people that we start talking and then they finish the sentence for you. But that can be kind of annoying too. So paraphrase the speaker's words, summarize what they say. Because if you're listening to somebody, can't you demonstrate that you're being an active listener? Right? If Ken and I are talking and Ken says something, can I paraphrase back, showing him that I'm listening to him? And then he has the option to do what? Accept or reject. He could correct me. Well, no, Dan, that's not quite what I was trying to say to you. So they can accept or reject, and that creates that constant relationship building process that if you do that. Now, if nobody's listening to nobody, then we have basic communication going back and forth, then we're not going to probably build a relationship as quickly as possible. Okay? So these are some of the techniques you can use. Interrupt or disagree, rush into correcting the speaker. How many times have you been corrected by somebody? Oh, you meant this. Right? That's kind of negative. That's not going to build a positive relationship with somebody. Focus on content. Focus on being open-minded. Be open-minded, listening to what they have to say, especially if you're in negotiations or you're listening to their idea. Because just because you might not think their idea is the best and that yours is better, you want to make sure that you're at least giving them platform. Right? Because if you give them no platform, you're not going to have a relationship to negotiate anyways, right? And that's really where negotiation comes into play, is that you have a relationship and you're going to persuade somebody, right? Remember we said about trust. We got to get to trust. The only way to get to trust is to have a relationship. The only way to get to a relationship is to take a risk. The only way to take a risk is to have communication where there's good dialogue back and forth. So going back to that pyramid. Okay, so these are some of the key skill sets that you can start to apply to show that you're an active listener. When you show that you're an active listener, you can also help that person be an active listener. Not where you're going to go, look, Ken, I'm a professional speaker, so let me tell you what you need to do. Right? You're not going to do that because that would not build a very good relationship with Ken and I. But if I can actively demonstrate to Ken that I'm listening to him, what's going to happen subconsciously with Ken? Hopefully, potentially. If I'm demonstrating that I'm feeding back, hey, Ken, what I think I heard you say is this, this, and this. Am I correct? And he says, yes. When I speak, do you think he might play back what I said to see if he understands me? Now, if he doesn't, what can I do?
Reiterate what you said.
I can reiterate, or I can even ask a question like, so Ken, let me see if I'm understanding what I'm trying to explain to you. Always put it on you, right? Because you don't want to put it on them. If you blame them, is that gonna develop a good relationship with them? Most likely no. Okay. So some of these listening skill sets are things that you can start to implement right away. If all you walk away today with is becoming a more effective listener, then you're going to be like 80% there at becoming a better communicator. Because those people that you communicate with usually are felt they're not listened to. Okay? If you have questions, stop me at any point. How to reach a poor listener? What can you do? This is on page 4 in your workbook. Like we said earlier, ask the listener to restate what they heard you say. If they restate it, you have the option to correct what you meant to say to them or to get understanding that they are asking and receiving your message. Ask clarifying questions. So I can clarify what Ken is saying to me. It shows that I'm actively listening to him. So I can then clarify to him so he knows I'm understanding him. Ask for feedback at intervals. You ever talk with anybody that seems to go on and on and on and on and on and you can't get a word in edgewise? So if you're that kind of person, at intervals, you might want to either A, try to be cognizant of that and stop yourself and ask for feedback. Or if you're not that professional communicator and you are the professional communicator in that scenario, what do? You ask for clarification at that point. Let me see if I understand what you're saying, Ken, because you're saying a lot of great stuff. I think what you said was this, this, and this. So I'm asking a clarifying question because even though Ken should be doing that as the sender, I as the receiver and the professional communicator using these skill sets and techniques is going to be applied to that conversation. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can also ask for feedback and don't ever say, do you understand me? Why? Yeah, it's kind of negative. Do you think if I say something like, do you understand this? And it's something simple, do you think they're going to go, well, first of all, what are they going to say? Even if they don't understand it, what are they going to say?
Of course I do.
Of course I understand it. And you walk away thinking whatever you want them doing for you is going to get done. And then you follow up and what happens?
No.
Didn't get done. And why didn't it get done? Because they really didn't understand. So don't go back to the do you understand me or did you understand what I just said, because that's more of a negative connotation and that's not going to help in that development. Okay. Questions, do's, and don'ts. Proving you're listening by asking questions on the next page of your workbook. Open-ended questions. Open-ended questions usually begin with who, what, when, where, how, please explain, and tell me more. These are open-ended questions that cannot usually be answered yes or no. Now, the two that I don't like to use is the why and the who questions, because what does that do? Yeah, it could be like, well, why did you say that, Ken? Like it's almost like fighting words, or who said that? So the who and the why are not always the most effective words to ask as open-ended questions. My favorite one is either tell me more or please explain. A lot of times when I'm talking to people and I want them to talk more so I can get more information from them, I'll just say, oh, that's interesting. Can you explain that further? And then you got to shut up and do what? Start listening, right? So active listening is a skill set that you can start utilizing some of these techniques to become a more effective communicator, okay? So Open-ended questions are great. Closed-ended questions usually can be answered what? Yes or no. So if you're trying to clarify something or trying to get a commitment from somebody, typically you're going to want to ask a yes or no question. You don't want to beat around the bush. Can you do this project for me? Yes, you can, or no, you can't. That's what you're going to want to hear if you're trying to get some kind of a commitment from somebody. Clarifying questions goes back to clarifying what they just said to you or you saying to them, right? Because remember, it doesn't have to be a two-way professional conversation. Most people today have never learned some of these skill sets that we're talking about today. Not a big deal, right? You're not going to walk around going, look, I'm a professional communicator, so here's how the rules are going to go. It's not going to happen that way. You're just going to have normal conversation, and you're going to start using some of these techniques to become more effective. And when you become more effective, people start to go, wow, that Pastor Cody is an awesome communicator. I don't know how he does it, but boy, is he good. And he might not have said anything. Right? So listening is one of the cornerstones, as I said. All right. So closed-ended questions. There's some ideas on that page. I'm not going to go through too many of them because we are pressed for time. How about this word, dialogue question?
Yeah. So if you can't say, do you understand someone, then what do you say to know that they're understanding?
Bring it back on yourself. What I'm hearing you say is that, what I'm trying to say to you is that I want to explain this, this, and this to you. Does that make sense? Right? You always put it back on your onus that you're not explaining it properly.
Okay.
If you put it on them that they don't understand, then you're kind of blaming them. But if you kind of put it on, let me make sure I'm explaining this right. I'm looking to get this and this and this done. Does that make sense to you? Or what do you think of that?
Okay.
And then be quiet and let them say what they say. And that will clarify whether they got what you said or they didn't get what you said.
All right.
Good question. Other questions? Dialogue. Anybody want to give me a definition of dialogue? What does dialogue mean to you?
Engaged conversation.
Say that again? Conversation.
Between two people.
Between two people. I like how he added between two people. Right? Can you have communication between two people and not have dialogue?
Yeah.
So what's missing between dialogue and communication? Obi kind of said it.
Yeah. Dialogue is like talking. Right?
Two-way communication in which both parties are engaged. If Pastor Cody starts talking to me and I'm just like looking at Ken or looking away from him, are we communicating? Are we communicating? But are we dialoguing?
No.
No, because I'm not even listening to him. Right? There's no dialogue there because there's no two-way communication. Right? Or if you said, how many husbands have done that? Your significant other is talking to you, and they go, yeah, Are they listening? Probably not. Are they communicating? Yeah, but are they having a true dialogue? Probably not. They're probably not listening to that conversation. So dialogue is just a higher level of communication. So it's where two people fully engaged in a conversation. Doesn't mean that they're doing active listening or that they're using the skill sets that we're teaching you here today, but it means that at least they're giving you eye contact, they're listening to you, they're kind of responding back, so there's some two-way communication going on back and forth. Okay? So having a dialogue is a very important aspect. You want to assume positive intent. I mean, if you're getting in a conversation with somebody, are you expecting to leave enemies?
No.
No. You're hoping that you're going to create a relationship here, or continue a relationship, or build a relationship. You're not communicating with somebody that you're then going to not like anymore, or for whatever reason you don't want to talk to them anymore. And you got to assume the same thing on their side. Now, are there negative people that look at the world negatively? Of course there are. But you have to assume that they want to communicate with you and that they want to create this positive intent. Listen first and generously. That goes back to what I said. God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth, so let's use them in that. Use straight talk, right? If you've ever spoken to somebody that's very techno-savvy, like an engineer or an accountant or anybody that uses a lot of acronyms, right? and you start talking to them and they're like, oh, all you need to do is get some more RAM, some more ROM, get a bigger hard drive, put an RJ45 to that connection, and then you'll be able to connect to that network. You just lost people, right? Because you're using words that they're not familiar with. At the end of that conversation, you ask a clarifying question, they're going to say what? Completely got it. And they walk away completely frustrated because they don't have it. Okay, so be careful with acronyms. So on the bottom of page 6, I want you to take a few minutes and just go through those yes/no questions and circle yes or no, and then circle down at the key what you have. If you're not done, you can always do it a little bit later. On page 7, it says, who is your listener? Are they a big picture thinker? Or are they more of a detail-oriented thinker? This is where you want to try to think about that individual that you're communicating with, because if you can change your style, I usually am a big picture thinker. I usually don't get into the details as much. I usually try to look at it from that perspective. But if I'm talking to an engineer, or I'm talking to somebody that's very detail-oriented, if I don't change my style, is there going to be some communication problems there? And if they don't have some of these techniques or skill sets, are we going to have a real good dialogue? Probably not. So we want to make sure that we're being listener-centered. Think about what the person that you're speaking to, think about how you should listen to them and how you should communicate to them. Extremely busy people, or they have a lot of time. You're real busy. Somebody walks in your office. They got an hour to kill. They sit down. Hey, what's going on? Pastor Johnson, what are you doing? Right? And they sit there, right? Because they got lots of time. But you might be in a busy situation where you have to alleviate yourself from that. Okay? So think about how you might want to communicate to that person. Familiar with the subject. We talked a little bit about that. If you're using acronyms or things that they're not familiar with, right? I know nothing about music. So if he starts talking music to me, I'm going to be like, I haven't got a clue. That's just me, right? So what are some other listener-centered type of people that you can think of? I want to fill in 3 more bullet points. This is where that active listening and learning comes into play. What do you think? Anybody online too can obviously respond. What other types of listeners that are kind of extremes? I'll give you one to get you started. How about men and women? When we talk with men and we talk with women, are there some possible communication problems there? A couple, right? So what's another one?
Age.
Age. Excellent. Younger and older. Right? Is there communication problems for that?
Yeah.
So, excellent. Age. So younger versus older, men versus women. What's the one more? Upbringing. Right? Culture. That could kind of put into upbringing. Upper class, lower class, middle class, right? There's all types of social aspects on the social ladder. So that's going to be a different way we communicate. So think about that. Listen carefully and intently. Nod when they say something, like we said earlier. It shows that you're listening. If you're just staring off into space, or you have that deer in the headlight look, you're probably not listening, and it's not going to fake them out. Yes, Mackenzie?
Yeah, sometimes when like someone is nodding too much or they're staring and like not even blinking, I feel like they're not listening either.
Yeah.
So if you do that like too much, and they're just like,
Yeah.
they're faking it.
Yeah.
So yes, look for that eye blink. Absolutely, because if you start looking at body language is a big part of communication. If you've ever had to do any type of cold calling where you had to call somebody on the phone? Is that a lot harder? Yeah, because they don't get to see you, you don't get to see them, all you get to hear is voice inflection. So body language can play a big part of that. And if they're staring into space, but yet nodding their head, it reminds you of those little dogs that sit in the back of the window of the cars and the head bounces. I know that's aging myself, I'm dating myself, but those are just sitting there nodding away. So absolutely you have to think about that. Check the listener's frame of mind and intervals. That's where we want to get feedback. We want to ask clarifying questions. Are they really getting my message? Because if they're getting your message, you're going to have better luck at increasing that relationship, which obviously is going to increase that risk-taking ability with that person, which is obviously going to lead to trust, and trust is going to lead to something else, which we'll talk about at the end. Okay? All right. Any other questions online, Cody? Nothing. Crickets.
Hey,
All right.
Dan,
Yes.
when, say you're in sales. I took a Dale Carnegie sales course back in the day, and you ask questions that purposefully engage the person, and well, in this case, so that they have to answer something that's positive back to you. So I'm just asking you, are we just not there yet? But can you actually, to keep someone listening, actually intentionally engage them with a line of questioning?
Yes, that's where we get into the open-ended questions. The more open-ended questions you ask somebody and then be quiet. Now, have you ever asked an open-ended question where they just, like my kids, how was school today? Is that an open-ended question? Yeah, how, right? How was school? Mm-hmm. Or good. Oh, what was good about that? I had gym. So just because you have these techniques doesn't mean you're going to be guaranteed success. But yes, open-ended questions where you ask the open-ended question, let them respond, and get them to continue to keep asking open-ended questions if they're not answering kind of the way you want it to go. Getting them to be more positive could be a little more difficult because of the fact that if they're one of those negative Nellies of the world, they're going to always be looking at the glass half empty. But still asking open-ended questions is going to give you more information that you can then gear up the next best question of the open-ended question that you want to ask next. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Clarifying
So
question.
there's a technique.
So yeah, so the best technique is open-ended questions. And I used to use those on my children all the time, but that doesn't mean they were always going to spend 5 minutes communicating to me. So that's the difficulty. So, but showing that you're listening, giving that body language that you're engaged to them is all going to help increase them opening up more and more to you. Because remember, until they get to that relationship where they're willing to, do I trust you enough to take a risk with you and share some things with you? Until you get to that point, you're going to be more on the lower level of, how was school, basic talk and basic conversation that we saw in that pyramid, the pyramid in the earlier slide. So does that make sense? All right. Any other questions? Cody left. Okay. All right. Page 8. Paradox of anger. And we've all seen this play out many, many times when we're at a store or a retail establishment. The paradox of anger says the more you express your anger, the more habitual it becomes. Have you seen people that are just angry in life? Right? The more they do that, the more they create the habit of being an angry person. But on the same token, if you look at the more you let others vent their anger, the quicker it usually dissipates. So if you've ever seen a customer service person, either on the phone, have an angry customer, or you see somebody like a manager deal with somebody that's angry in front of their retail store, the worst thing you can do is engage them. Right? We've all heard Pastor Mike say, if there's no fuel, there's no fire. Right? Now, is that hard to do that? Absolutely. I've had to practice that many times in my life. So if there's no fuel, there's no fire. And the more you let them sound off at being angry, guess what starts to happen? They go away. The one example I saw once, I was stuck in Pittsburgh, waiting to fly back home, wanted to be home for the weekend. The plane got canceled. It was the last plane going out.
Wow.
It's exciting. We get to stay in the airport or get sent to a hotel. But what I found was a guy went up and he started yelling at the young lady that was in charge of the gate. She was in her mid-20s. And he just ripped into her. And it was interesting for everybody that was in that terminal to watch the whole process. Well, I'm watching just to see where this is going to go, because that's what I like to do with people watching. But the short end of the story was, the more he yelled and screamed at her, the more she just stood there calmly and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but there's lightning going on, and the plane cannot go up in lightning." So she handled it very well. Now, had she started yelling back or engaging this guy, do you think security would have been called at some point? Probably. So we have to let anger dissipate from somebody. And you know what finally happened is this guy walked away and he left. Well, he went over to sit down or something. And I went up to her and had a quiet conversation. I said, "You did an excellent job." Because I wanted to reward her positively for doing something that was good. And that's what she did. I said, well, next time, send him up in a plane and let it get hit by lightning, and then he can deal with that. But
What did you give her?
just praise, verbal affirmation, verbal praise.
Okay.
I just said to her, that was very well handled. You know, if you had a manager, I would be more than happy to say you did a good job.
Okay.
And then I gave her a $100 bill. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, so I just gave her verbal affirmation because I wanted her at some point in her life to do that again, even though she didn't work for me. How many times do we give or not give verbal affirmation, right? People want to be liked and admired. So managing your emotions can be something that can be a little scary if you're that person that gets angry a lot. I know when I was driving, I used to have road rage issues. I've gotten a lot better. I'm a lot better at that. Now people cut me off and I just let them do it. I just let them do it. So being aware of the situation can help you make it better for yourself, right? Because if you know that you get angry often, you got to learn how to control that, because anger is not going to help that relationship. Yeah. So you have to know how to manage your own emotions. Here's a couple things on page 8. You can count to 5 or 50 if you need to go that high. Ask a question. Ask for time. I need to go get a glass of water and walk away, right? Because if you stay in that mode and you keep getting angry, what's it going to become for you? What did we just say about the paradox of anger? It's going to become habitual for you. You don't want that to become habitual for you. That is not how you become a professional communicator. So if you have issues managing your own emotions, this page is going to be very good to review and come back to and use some of these techniques to excuse your anger or to let it dissipate, right? Because that's what somebody's going to do with you. In other words, don't be that drama queen, right? You can express your anger. Man, that makes me really mad, Obi, what you did the other day about that email. That's an expression of my anger. But if I start throwing my computer at him or getting crazy and throwing things at him and yelling and screaming and pounding my fists on the table, that's probably not going to work well to create a relationship with Obi. So we need to manage that. So changing your perspective, you can easily express your anger, but doing all those other things that becomes dramatic, you become what's known as a drama queen or king if you're a guy, right? So you don't want to be that person. You can go in and say, I understand why you're upset. And this is why you're trying to manage somebody else's anger. So remember, you got to stay calm, cool, and collective if somebody's angry at you. You can understand, say things like, I understand why you're angry, Pastor Cody, about that. I should not have done it that way. But if I start saying, don't feel that way, Cody, getting angry at me, that's not going to help the relationship and build that communication model with somebody. So don't say, don't feel that way. Don't say, I told you this. Don't go with always and never. If you know my children, and I know most of you know my children, Heather and Stephanie were taught pretty much all their life, always and never are never right. I preached that into my kids' life from like the age of 5. Always and never are never right. Always and never, never right. Ask them, they'll tell you that. Well, then my oldest daughter came up to me at the age of 10. Profound things to me. She says, Dad, now I'm a preteen. Now I thought, preteen, what is it? I know 13 is a teenager. She's 10. What's a preteen? So I asked her, I said, Heather, what's a preteen? You know what she said? She said, double digits, duh, at 10. So I said, oh, okay, double digits. So then another time when we were coming back from school, she came up to me and she said, Dad, do you know how you always taught us always and never or never right? I go, yes, I'm very proud of you, honey, that you learned that. She said to me, well, that doesn't make sense, right? The child always attempting to fight the parent. I said, what do you mean? She says, well, if always and never are never right, then that doesn't make sense. So she used logic. So could I have gotten angry? Could I have said, I told you this is the way it works? Could I have done all those things? Sure. But you know what I did? I said, you know what, Heather? You're absolutely right. You know what I should have taught you? Is always and never are seldom right. Because if you say, you always do this, and they did it once, you cannot say they always do that. If you say you never do this, and they buy flowers once for you ladies, you can never say that again.
This is true.
Right? So man, go buy your flowers. So thank you, Pastor Obi.
The difference is saying you never do that and you have never done that. That's different.
Say that again.
Say that one more time. I want to hear it. So
It doesn't matter.
No.
it's very similar. Oh, you said never done that.
You never do this, like you don't do it consistently, or you have never done this before.
But
Like
see,
you've
if
never done it in your life. Those are different.
Exactly. But see, if they've done it once, most people will still say you've never done this. But if they've done it once in their life, then you can't say they've never done it.
Not that they haven't ever done it, but they never do it.
They don't consistently do it.
Yes. So they never do it.
It's all about wording.
That's exactly. What do we hear from Pastor Mike all the time? Consistency is everything. So yeah, these skill sets can be utilized to get somebody to be more consistent in their communication. So just be aware of the always and never. You got to be very careful with those. All right. How about a cooling off period? Have you ever done that?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look, this conversation isn't quite going the way I anticipated. Can we have a conversation tomorrow, Pastor Obi, about this? What does that show in that relationship or in that dialogue? If I'm really angry at him and I can't seem to control my emotions, but I got to the point where I can say, hey, time out here. Let me go get a drink. Let me go home. Let me get out of this situation. Run for the hills. Obi?
There are some people in which their personality is such that if they do not have that conversation right there and then, it begins to fester in their mind. They begin to think the worst things possible. And my wife as well. So how do you deal with that? Because I'm the type in which I like to walk away, think about it, come back. What do you do if you were to walk away, like literally all hell breaks loose, because they must talk about it right there?
I just want to ask a clarifying question.
Don't walk away. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Are you talking about with a spouse relationship, or are you talking about with any type of relationship? Any type.
I'm not afraid to answer that.
Go ahead.
I will take all. I'll take all my names. When I got counseled for marriage, the guy that counseled me, he said this. One of the first things he said was, he says, when you get to the place, and a lot of years ago, his well being married, he's a phenomenal guy. But he says, when you get to a place where it becomes too much, he says, two parties have to be very, very concerned with the fact that if you go beyond that place where it becomes too much for you, you can say something so detrimental in that moment, it'll take you a lifetime to repair it. Mm-hmm. He said, it's better off that you take a moment and say, let's step back, it's becoming too much, and then let's come back when we have cooler heads, we're thinking reasonably, we still can talk about it. So I'm the kind of guy, literally, like I used to shut down. Like if I got like really ticked off, I was no talking. I turn on my music. It's real nice and calm, and you don't hear anything out of me. But I'm living. I'm about to move chairs. All right. But then I had to learn in ministry, work with people that I had to. And I promise to God, I literally had to say, God, show me how to talk to people, because I would say things that would cut people to the core. and it wouldn't build them, it would deplete them. And so after the Lord showed me how, like, okay, you said like you never do this, you don't consistently do this. So now I can honestly say that when it becomes too much, I can say, you know what? Let's do this. Let's come back on another day at this time, and let's bring this up because I want to make sure that what I'm going to say to you is going to be able to build you and not tear you down. Because we can all say things that's going to tear our partner down or someone else down, but at the end of the day, our job is really to build them, even to the point of being so livid. I was livid the other day about something, and I was like, you know what? This is probably not the right time to say anything, and I was correct. But when I went back to the person and talked about it, they said, you know what? I'm glad you came back to talk to me about it, because after we left, I was able to think about what I had done and what I had said. And I didn't actually have to say what I really wanted to say. They clarified it for me.
Exactly. There's two key things that you said too. He placed it on himself, right? He wasn't saying, you're so angry, Obi, that I gotta get away from you. He was saying this was about him. He also said something key that was positive intent of what? Making the relationship better. Because like you said, we can easily tear people down, set them on fire, and walk away and be like, huh, took care of that one. So if we do that, that's not going to build the relationship, which isn't going to get the other things that we want. So point taken, that's one way to do it. Obi, does that make sense?
Because if the devil is throwing zoozies at you and stuff like that, you gotta be mindful that you don't want the devil to win.
Exactly. All right. Here's a question. Can we change the past? Right? We can't change the past. So the past consists of opinions, right? In the past, I was a poor listener. In the past, I was an angry person. In the past, it's just opinions at this point because we cannot change the past. So it's passive. It can't be changed. It holds little possibility of meaningful what? Change. Unless you have a DeLorean time machine that you can get into and go back in time to make that change, then there's no way to change that past, is there? So don't beat yourself up today and say, wow, I'm that angry person. I'm that person that can't listen attentively. I'm that person that wigs out and thinks about something else. I'm that. Don't think about that. The past cannot be changed. How about the future? Can we change the future? Can we change the future? All right, somebody change tomorrow for me.
Well, how do you
I mean, you can have an impact on it. There's some deep questions that
Everybody tomorrow.
I don't know if you heard what Ken said, but Ken said, say it again, Ken.
You can have an impact on it.
You can have an impact on it, right? You can't change the future, but you can have an impact on it, right? It's comprised of potential, but we really can't take any action to change tomorrow, right? So if we can't change tomorrow, what do we have to do? Can't change the past, can't change the future. We need to what? Change the now, change the present. This is why you're taking these techniques, and you're going to use these techniques starting when? Today, now. We're going to start using these things, right? And I'm hearing some of you that are asking questions you're now trying to use some of the techniques. I don't know if you're purposely trying, but I hear them because I listened for them. So it's action-oriented to change today. If you really remember the movie Back to the Future, did they change the past? No. What they did is they went back in the past, which is now what? The present. They changed the present to what? Impact the future. So when the third one came out, they had to go further back in the past from the new future that they created so they could rechange the present, the older present, to influence the older past that they created. So I know it sounds a little confusing, but we can take action only in the present moment of today. Can't change the future. We can't change the past. So we want to make sure that we're taking these skill sets, these techniques, and implement one. Like I said earlier, if you walk away today and all you do is become a more effective listener, I think that's great success because that'll take care of about 80% of becoming a professional communicator. Okay? So possibility language, when you're talking to somebody and you want them to think about the future and changing things, you're going to say, I think it's possible to do this. What if we could do this? What if you could become a more effective listener? How about if you were a better communicator with your spouse? How about if you were a better communicator with the people that are underneath you in ministry? These are all the questions that you want to ask yourself, because that's going to help you change what you're doing in the present. If you don't, then of course you're going to keep doing what you've always done, and you're going to get the same results. Because if you do the same thing and expect different results, what's that the definition of? Insanity. Yeah, we've all heard that. Do the same thing over and over again, but expect different results. That's insanity. So practice positive intent. The desire for the relationship, we talked about that earlier. If you're talking and communicating with somebody, you probably want to build a relationship with them for whatever purpose that particular person is. If it's your spouse, hopefully it's a more positive relationship. If it's somebody that you work with, right? If you're in the corporate world and you got somebody that you just don't like working with, could you use some of these techniques to become have them like you more? Sure. If you start listening to what they say, I'm not saying you have to, what does Pastor Mike say? We don't have to like them, but we have to love them, right? So if you're showing them some of these techniques, even though you don't like them, is that potentially going to increase that relationship with them? Yeah. And maybe one day they surprise you and they become your best friend. You never know. Maybe. So overcoming some communication obstacles, build awareness. Build awareness. Have a dialogue. What's a dialogue? Two-way communication where two parties are engaged in that conversation. But you can also encourage that by being the effective listener. Separate the behavior from the person. Right? We've heard that in child psychology for years. You're not a bad kid. The behavior is bad. So if you remember reading Dr. Spock back in the 70s and 80s. Separate the behavior. Commit to being accountable for follow-up action. If you're going to have that follow-up, like Pastor Johnson said earlier, make sure you do it. Don't say, oh, we're going to meet tomorrow, and then just never meet with them. Put it on the calendar. Show them that you care about the situation, you care about the relationship, and that you're going to do these things. And I know I've been kind of going through some of these pages and not telling you, but some of these things I want you to kind of do on your own. Let's go to mental toughness. I'm almost done. Mental toughness. Do you have to have some mental toughness? Or maybe some direction by the Holy Spirit? Pray that the Holy Spirit will give you some of this mental toughness. Be positive, but be realistic. You know, don't be that person that everything's always perfect. This world is not perfect. We know that. You know, but you can still look at the glasses half full as opposed to half empty. Control your emotional situations. If you just get better at doing that, if you're that emotional person, right? If you can start to control those emotional situations, that's going to help you. Solution focus during conflict. Again, not focusing on the person, but the conflict that you're having with that person or the behavior. Because if we can solve the problem together, then we've got a commonality. Alertness and focus, self-confidence. These are all things that you're going to start to gather, right? As you become a better communicator, do you not get more self-confident? Anything you start doing more and more, you're going to get more and more confidence. So public speaking is a great thing to take, because what's the number one fear for adults? Public speaking. Yeah, no, public speaking is number one. Maybe spiders is number two. So being aware of these things, sense of humor, if that's you. Not everybody has a sense of humor. If that's not your gift, don't use it, because you'll be laughing and they'll be looking at you with the deer in the headlight look, right? And what Mackenzie said, they'll be like, yeah, great joke. You don't want that, okay? So know what's going to work for you and utilize some of these things. Last slide. 5 levels of communication. We talked about this on the second slide. We all start with social conversation, right? Just small talk. How's the weather? You know, don't get involved in politics conversation, but small talk and conversation or social conversation is what? That's communication. We said that earlier. That doesn't mean they're listening to us. That doesn't mean we're listening to them. It's more or less just small talk. So that's not going to get us a lot of what we want in a relationship if we stay at that level. So with small talk, and we get into idea sharing, and we start sharing ideas, then we know that that's what? Dialogue from our definition earlier. 2 people engaged in a conversation where both are engaged in listening and actively communicating with one another is true dialogue. Dialogue is where you want to be, not at communication. You want to be at dialogue. Because after you get into the point of dialogue and the idea sharing, you're building that relationship, and now they're willing to what? Take a little bit of risk with you. I'm not saying they're going to give you your wallet, but they're willing to take a little bit of risk. And if that risk goes well for them or you, does that increase or decrease the relationship? If it goes well, it increases, okay? So remember, positive intent, we want that relationship, because as we get more and more risk-taking, right? Remember when you used to just go up to somebody and you just fall backwards? How many people would do that with somebody?
Oh, like a test ball?
Yeah, like a test ball, right? If you don't know that person behind you, are you going to do it? Probably not, right? But if it's your spouse, somebody you truly trust is going to catch you. If you have that kind of relationship and that trust, you're going to take that risk. And if they fall backwards and you don't catch them, do you think they're going to try that again with you? The answer is no. But if you caught them, then of course, there's that level of trust. So if we get to trust, what comes after trust? Is there anything after trust?
Love.
I was about to.
That would come from a woman, yes. I'll give you that one, Mackenzie. Love. But what I was thinking is this: influence. If you've done anything where you're trying to sell your idea, or sell your product, or sell your service, sell your friendship, whatever it is, if you don't have trust, if you can't get them to take risk with you, if you can't share an idea with them and have true dialogue, are you going to be able to influence them to do what you want them to do? This takes us into a next level, which is what? Leadership or sales in the secular world, right? So I'm not saying I'm going to be teaching another class anytime soon, but that's where I tell people is that the next level from this class, once you start to master this stuff, is influence, where you can negotiate with somebody. If you can influence somebody, right? Pastor Dan asked me to do something. He's got influence on me. I'm probably going to say yes, most likely, depending on what it is. But if somebody off the street says, hey, can you do this for me? And I don't know them, am I going to trust them? Probably not. All right. Any questions? The final call of action that you're going to do on your own is you're going to go back to that first page. If you haven't filled it out, you need to fill it out. Describe the situation, and then think about some of the techniques that you have now. What could you do differently? What could you have done differently with that conversation that went bad to make it more effective? What techniques can you use? Questions? I know it is 2 minutes after. Questions from anybody on the internet?
Nope.
No. Questions from anybody in the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
How long would this class normally be? 3 hours?
This class normally goes from 9 to 4.
Oh, all day.
It's an all-day class. So 9 to 4. I cut it way back, trust me. What? What did she say? I missed it.
Wow, that's a lot of communicating.
In a good way.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you. You're done.